Joining us on the Western Hotline to chat some Bills and some draft is Joe Marino for our weekly conversation. He of the Locked On Bills podcast and the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. Good morning, Mr. Marino. How are you today?
Good morning, guys. I'm doing well. Hope you guys are as well.
Yeah, I listened to you and Kyle on the NFL Scouting do your mock draft the last couple days. Listen to that, so I'm dialing in. I'm ready for some names here. We're hearing Mel Kiper. It does seem like this next week or two, Joe, is jockeying season, right? Where you may see some crazy risers and some crazy fallers. And Tet McMillan at receiver might have been wide receiver number 1 after Travis Hunter, and now maybe he's sliding into the 20s. And the same is true of quarterbacks. I wonder how this time of year in draft prep kind of strikes you as teams start to, whatever, they're leaking information, protecting information. It's smoke screen season, I guess is the short way to say it.
Yeah, it's that time of year where information starts to come out. You feel like maybe in some ways the outside of the league is catching up with what's going on internally, but then you have to foil that against intentional information going out there. It's time to get into the tape. I think that's what is always the best thing to do is you can hear all this stuff and you can hear narratives about the types of people these guys are, but just go to the tape. You'll find a pretty good understanding of what these players can be.
If this were not a league where quarterback is so tilted to the top, like best players in this draft, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, is that like an easy 1-2? What's the short list of the best players at the top that are not quarterbacks?
Yeah, I don't think that the best prospects in this draft are quarterbacks, but I do think you'll see them go early because that's just what the NFL does because you need to have a quarterback. But I think it's pretty clear that the blue chip talent in this draft, Abdul Carter out of Penn State, you got Travis Hunter out of Colorado, and I'd even throw Ashton Genty out of Boise State in that bucket. I think he's a really special talent at running back. And again, we're throwing aside positional value, but want to think about who the legit blue chip players are. Those three guys, to me, are in a class of their own.
When it comes to Genty, what best since Barkley?
Yeah, I think he's in that bucket. When I think elite running back prospects, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson out of Texas, and then I think Ashton Genty's really kind of cut from the same cloth. And Genty, obviously, maybe not quite as explosive as those players, but he's got such good body control and contact balance, and the way that he's able to really play through contact and get those tough yards, I think is really special. And so, you see the emergence here of, these lead running backs again in the league, and I think Ashton Genty is tailor-made to be a focal point of an NFL offense that's going to give a team something to lean on, maybe not every team gets to have the elite level quarterback. You're trying to round out the rest of your operation, and I think Genty can really be the focal point of a big-time rushing offense.
Joe, when you look at defensive tackle and cornerback in this draft, with the Bills sitting at 30, whether they move up, they move back, let's just, for the sake of conversation, say they stay at 30. How many different variations of players do you expect there to potentially be for the Bills? I think that the mock drafts, for me anyways, and even big boards, I think there is more opinion about slotting the top 5 at both of those positions than I can really maybe use on any other position. Does that play into the Bills' favor if they really like someone, or if they're maybe a team that's very open to any of the top 5 players, is that maybe more ideal for the Bills? It seems like there's a lot of jockeying of positions. Sometimes Kenneth Grant is the 20th pick, sometimes he's the 38th pick, and it just seems like that you could say that about a lot of players at both of those positions.
Yeah, I agree. I think you could talk me into a lot of different players being available. So I think the easiest way to look at the corner conversation is probably by eliminating who's not going to be there. And I think there's only 3 guys that I think for sure won't be there at 30 at corner. And one of them would be Travis Hunter, if that's how you want to classify him. I think Jahdae Barron out of Texas, and I think Will Johnson out of Michigan. I don't think those players are going to get to 30, but any other corner, I think, is a legitimate chance, whether that's Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State, Maxwell Harrison from Kentucky, Savone Revel from ECU, Darian Porter out of Iowa State. I think the Bills will have an opportunity to decide through several of those options because I do expect them to be available at pick 30. So, you can sit there and I can give you 5 or 6 names, but in the reality, the Bills probably don't like all 5 or 6 of those players. I think the part that's always difficult for me And I think anybody that's kind of more in the media side of this is that you don't get to meet these people. You don't really get to talk to people that have been around them to really get a feel for, how they're wired, what their habits are. And that's really what's going to separate these guys. They're all talented. They're all good football players that are talented, that have a baseline level of athleticism. The separating factors are going to be, who they are as people and what they're going to be willing to put into their opportunity. Just like any other job in the world, you can bring in talented people, but when it's time to execute, when it's time to have work ethic and do the right things to be the best version of yourself, like, what are they going to be like? And I think that's the separating factor. So we could say there's 5 or 6 options, but ultimately I bet you the Bills would only like 1 or 2 of the players we'd even talk about.
Joe Marino of the Locked On Bills and Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. Joe, I wonder if there is a lesson to be learned, or chalk it up to sometimes stuff happens. They're not in that different a boat they were when they drafted Kaiir Elam, right? They have a corner that they like. They'd probably like to get a young corner too. And I feel like when we're talking about the difference between, well, this guy excels in man or this guy excels in zone, that doesn't always have to be that the guy is only going to be good at one or the other. Sometimes it's based on the system that they played. And I wonder what would you think is different this time? How similar is it? And which way do you think they would start to lean? Because don't we think that they're going to maybe start playing a little more man based on some of their coaching hiring? If we were to say corner is where they're going to go, how do they walk that line? How important is that differentiation between how a corner would excel?
Well, I think that's a fair call out, and I think the options, the depth of the class, I think is different this year, where going back to 2022, it was Stingley, Gardner, McDuffie, and then you kind of had Kaiir Elam was like the next guy, and there really hasn't been too many hits outside of that. Roger McCreary's more of a slot when you go back to that class. Kyler Gordon, more of a slot. Andrew Booth hasn't turned into anything. Cam Taylor-Britt's been high variance, and so the talent cliff was really different to me in 2022 compared to what this class offers. But then I do think it's fair to point out that there's a lot of mystery to exactly what the Bills are looking for. I think they've had a prototype in the past, but I think Kaiir Elam went against that prototype. And it's funny, we listened to, was it McDermott or Bean, maybe both of them at the owners' meetings, talking about how the importance of tackling at corner. Well, Kaiir Elam, that wasn't him at Florida. He wasn't a big-time tackler, physical guy that wanted to, defend the run. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they said that. And then Kaiir Elam kind of definitely doesn't check that box in terms of what he was at Florida. I thought he got a lot better at it in the NFL, but certainly not anything anyone would say is a major strength of his. And so I think I'm a little confused right now as to predicting the exact type of corner that the Bills would want to have. I think the good news is I don't know that a lot of these players that we're talking about in that range at pick 30 are scheme specific, where, you think of a guy like Rasul Douglas and he's only ever going to be a zone corner. Like, I don't feel that way about any of these options that we're talking about. And so I think the versatility of the group, the depth of the group should open the Bills up to having a good opportunity to get a guy they like at pick 30 at corner if that's the direction they want to go.
Is it more clear the fit that they need at defensive tackle?
I think so, yeah. I think what's absolutely missing is someone to platoon with Daquan Jones, who's 32. Last year of his deal, I thought we saw some age on him last year. So you need a running mate and you need a successor, and I think you can get that in the same thing. A player that this year platoons with him and takes some snaps, but then is groomed to be the primary option next to Ed Oliver in the A gaps. So yeah, I think that's more of a defined situation. Unless the Bills are willing to kind of adjust and evolve with the types of players they want at certain positions. We've seen that happen at receiver for the Bills. It's happened at linebacker. It's happened along the offensive line, where even at running back, where I think their prototypes have changed. At edge rusher, it's changed across this 8 years now that we've witnessed Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane running this operation. So in a traditional sense, I would think so, unless there is that desire to shift. We saw it with Tremaine Edmonds. They let him go, and they said, we want 2 matchup linebackers now. Okay. Well, if you could tell me exactly what their plan is, I could probably tell you exactly which players would make the most sense. So I think it's a nose tackle, but maybe the Bills suddenly want to have 2 penetration style players next to each other. So there's been a lot of evolution, and I wonder if some of that applies to the defensive tackle spot as well.
I don't know if it was Matt Beauvais. Someone asked McDermott about like the prototype, like the style or the size of a player. This is not a team since Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have been here that really go after that like 340 pounder, that really big run stuffing 2-gap defender. And I think what's unique about this draft at defensive tackle, Joe, especially at the top, where the Bills are going to be, I think, in prime position to take a guy. There are guys, I think there are more tweeners, guys that have position flexibility, can play 3, can play the 1 technique, that are right around 300 pounds. To you, would you just maybe lean to, they're going to go with a guy at that tweener spot where, hey, he's going to, be a platoon guy at the 1 tech, and maybe that's really where he ends up playing a majority of his time. But we appreciate that position flexibility because you look across the defensive line, and that is the flexibility and position flexibility is highly important. And I just wonder if they look at, if they're going to change something about their ideology, do you think it's that they might want a more of a 2-gap defender, a run stuffer that maybe doesn't have the high-end pass rush ability, but gives them a true anchor, which I do think, Joe, I think they were second last in the league last year giving up touchdowns against 12 personnel. If they want to keep Taron Johnson on the field, to me, I think they have to maybe not dramatically change what they want at the 1 tech, but I think a change of some sort is in order.
I tend to agree. I think sometimes there's a misconception that just being large means you're a good run defender.
Yeah, right.
Jordan Phillips is large. Vernon Butler are large. Those are 330, 340-pound dudes. They can't play the run to save their life. So there's a misconception that like there's a correlation between size and run defense. I don't think that's true. I do think that the Bills could use some more mass at defensive tackle, but it doesn't have to be just a guy that's going to clog space and not be able to move, because the reality is the most important thing that you can do as a defensive tackle is affect the quarterback, and the Bills' defenses play up the field and have athleticism. So, I think there's some conversation worth having there, but you're talking about just getting a run stuffing, guy that's going to eat space and keep the second level clean. Like that can't be in the conversation at pick 30. There has to be some havoc wreaking upside there as well, as opposed to a guy that's just going to be the plug against the run. So I do think that there's some room to have a shift and bring in that type of skill set. But I think the main thing still has to be the main thing, and it's what type of havoc you can wreak, particularly in this up-the-field penetration-style defense.
Joe Marino, Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. So you and Kyle Krabs did your mock draft. The Bills in that mock draft, everyone go download it, listen to it. He was on the Bills picks. You guys did odds and evens. And Derek Harmon's a name we've heard quite a bit. Is that a run to the podium pick? I guess I want to get your run to the podium picks, or another way to say that would be Brandon Beane's going to trade up 2 spots if this guy's still on the board, because we know he does that quite a bit, right? Like that guy's there. Yeah. I'm going to move my 2 to 3 spots. A short list of the 2 to 3 spot Brandon Beane zone.
Yeah, I thought Kyle did a good job with that pick of Derek Harmon out of Oregon. I think it's a very clean projection of the Bills' defense in terms of a 1 tech that can play multiple gaps, can defend the run, but gives you some up-the-field ability. I think at defensive tackle, the sprint to the podium players would be Kenneth Grant, D-tackle out of Michigan, and Derek Harmon, the D-tackle out of Oregon. And Kenneth Grant is that 330-pound dude, but that dude has range. His lateral mobility is really, really outstanding, and I think there's some unrealized pass rush upside with him as well. I think he's cut from the nose tackle cloth that you would say, Dexter Lawrence type player, in my opinion, where a DJ Reader type player, those types of guys, Javon Hargrave before, he kind of fell off the last few years. Like that's the type of nose tackle I think the Bills should be interested in. I think you would get that in either Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon. So at D tackle, those are sprint to the podium guys. I think the depth of the corner group probably doesn't. I mean, Jahdae Barron, if he's there, I don't think he touches that spot. That would be a sprint to the podium guy. And at edge, I think the depth of the edge class kind of pushes me away from that as well. And I think edge is a primary need, but I think it's a secondary primary need to what holes the Bills have to fill at corner and D tackle. So Kenneth Grant and Derek Harmon would really be the 2 somewhat realistic guys that, if they're available, figure out a way to get that done.
And I'm glad you brought up edge, because that's what I was going to get with you on, the 2 picks in the second round, Joe. There's some risers. I know Mike Green is a name from Marshall. He's been rising, tested really well. Is there kind of a fit or a name that you really like at either 56 or 62 at the edge position because in the second round, Joe, you're going to try to find a guy with tools that maybe has that higher floor. I don't know how many super high ceiling guys there will be at either of those second round picks, but what name or group of names do you really look at as like, man, I think he's a great scheme fit for the Bills, and like this is a guy with maybe a little bit of a higher ceiling than you would maybe expect a defensive end or edge player to have in the second round?
Yeah, and Nate, I really think that there's going to be some really attractive guys there, even with that second round pick that can fill in this edge position group where Landon Jackson, perhaps out of Arkansas, if he gets there, that'd be a really good draft choice. I really like this Ohio State edge, JT Tuimoloau. I think he's a really clean fit to the Bills' defense. A lot of athleticism to go with a power component to his game as well, and I think Barron Sorrell out of Texas really makes sense to me as a clean projection. And then I think the swing guy is Olu Oladejo out of UCLA, who actually played stack linebacker up until like week 3 of this season, and then he made the switch to edge rusher. And we saw that happen. Like Abdul Carter did that, and he's going to be a top 3 pick. He's an unbelievable prospect. Jalen Walker out of Georgia, kind of a hybrid player. And now this guy, Olu Oladejo, who's got size, who's got a lot of athleticism, and I think he's got a dense build that helps him hold up pretty well. I think that's like the swing bet on traits, bet on upside guy that you might think about there at the end of the second round. So that's kind of a pocket of guys, and I'd expect a couple of them to be available. So I think the Bills can probably wait on that edge rusher unless just something crazy happens and you got to you get a Shamar Stewart or something like that available at pick 30, and then you'd have to turn in that card for sure.
Joe Marino, you're mentioning like some guys. Sorry, we have to do it. This guy's here. Maybe you don't expect that. 2 questions. I want to go back to that one in a minute, though. Could linebacker sneak in here? You think anywhere in the first 3 picks?
I'd have a hard time with it. I mean, even with Milano being an expiring contract, Dorian Williams would be the last year of his rookie deal in 2026, and I thought he made such a big jump year over year from his rookie year to his sophomore season where, you saw both Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard in year 1 kind of have some struggles in the Bills' defense, and I think you got a guy with 3 years of time on task in the scheme. I'd probably want to give him an opportunity in 2026 to be the running mate to Terrell Bernard. So then you're really just talking about a depth player. I think the Bills should draft a linebacker, but to me, that's more of a day 3 conversation.
And finally, I made it this far without asking about a receiver.
I'm
but I just want
shocked.
to, as you're doing the mock, last night with Kyle Krebs, as I'm listening, I wonder if there's any one of those, just like you mentioned about Shamar Stewart, like, is there listen, we're going to address the defense and give a lot, but this guy's here. We can't not take this player. Do you have a receiver that fits that description?
Yeah, it's 100% Matthew Golden out of Texas. If he's at pick 30, there's just no way you could be upset with that selection because I think he's exactly the type of receiver that the Bills need, a legit field stretcher, like the best vertical threat in this class. And that's not just because he ran 4.29. I almost wish he ran a 4.31 so that people could stop talking about 4.2 receivers and production. It's like so silly to me.
Because there seems to be a little bit of he doesn't play that speed on tape. Would you agree with that? That he's not the craziest burner, but it's good enough?
Good, because that's the whole narrative. When guys are fast, they can't control their speed. I'm glad that he can run that fast, and people don't think he can. Look at him separate. The way that he can separate, that's what's most important to me is how that speed translates to the field. And this guy runs away from coverage. He's a dynamic route runner that can get down the field, and I think that speed element is exactly what this Bills offense is kind of missing. So that would be the let's break the plan because Matthew Golden's there at pick 30. I think he'd be exactly the type of receiver this offense needs.
And last thing, this is a James Cook question, Joe. The Bean this week said, we're on to the draft. There's no reason we can't talk next year. And, as much as Brandon Bean's not negotiating in the media, he's sending messages. And the next part of this is, what do the Bills do in the draft? Because a pick of a running back somewhere would not be crazy, whether that's special teams or depth or whatever. Could you at all justify a running back with one of those second-round picks? I don't want to listen to it for a second, but I feel like people keep telling me to keep my mind open to it because the class is that good in that department. Yeah. And if they're not planning to pay Cook, then they could definitely do it.
I'd much rather the Bills draft I think they would want to get a big playback, right? I think that's the best thing that James Cook has given this offense is that ability to hit the home run. And so, if you could get a Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn or an R.J. Harvey out of UCF, I think you would get a guy that has that type of ability, and you can do it on day 3. If the Bills draft a running back on day 2, that better come with a James Cook trade.
Okay. Yeah.
That needs to go hand in hand because I'm all about getting ahead of needs. The one need you don't have to get ahead of is running back.
Yep.
So that's what I would hope to see is a trade, and then then you use that capital to get reset the money at the position basically.
Yep. Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast and Locked On NFL Scouting podcast as well. Get those where you get your podcasts. Become a regular. I am. Joe, thanks. We'll chat next week.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.
Joe Marino.